for the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it depends also on your questions and so the discussion that comes out of that. Then the second part is focused on cash assistance, GBV risk mitigation. First, we have Luana, who works in the GBV AoR, between the GBV AoR and UNFPA in the humanitarian office. We'll talk about learning from Iraq. And then we have an exciting presentation as well from our colleagues in WRC and CARE, Tenzin and Paola. Certainly, I realize, yeah, and Karen as well, right? So that will be the last part, the last leg of our call. Maybe just to start, you saw with the call-in details that with the Riga position for Bangkok is being announced. So if you know good people, spread the word. We really want to get someone very strong into that position in Bangkok. And in the announcement, it says ASRO, which for UNFPA actually means Arab States. That's a mistake, but it has been corrected. So just to be clear, it is Bangkok and it's for the Asia region. So if you know anyone and you would like, or yourself, keep that in mind, help us find that brilliant person. And with that, I should probably explain. So we still have Lee Ashley, but Lee Ashley is moving on. She's decided to move on to other opportunities. So she's not staying for a very long time, and right now she's part-time. So that's why we're recruiting for after Lee Ashley. Okay. And then maybe just to recognize again, many of you might have been to SVRI. I'm sure when Jennifer comes back, we might have whether it's a call or an update through the MailChimp on the learning from SVRI. I heard there was a lot of activity. I was very jealous. I felt the energy all the way to Geneva. But that's for a call later on. I think that's kind of the main from my side. And then, of course, we can do an AOB at the end, right? So, and if you have any comments to the agenda, you can write it in the chat, and I'll also check if otherwise I'll just start. So we have with us today Farid, who is the GBV coordinator in the Puntland. He arrived on Surge. And we have Elizabeth Kigen, who's the GBV coordinator at the national level, to talk to us about the GBV response in Somalia. As I think most of you or everyone is aware, there was a declaration of a UN-wide scale-up, meaning UN agencies are asked to reprioritize and send all their resources or to really focus in on Somalia. It used to be called L3s in the past, sort of the similar kind of situation. The scale-up is focused on 4 priority clusters, so sectors, which is food security, nutrition, wash, and health. And of course, it's about the droughts and famine interventions. But GBV, of course, is also part of the story. And Jennifer Chase was in Somalia just a couple of weeks ago. But right now, I'm delighted and honored to be able to hand over to Farid and Elizabeth. I know Farid is here. I haven't seen you, Elizabeth.
Yes, I'm around and I'm unable to share my screen. Could you kindly give me access so that I can share my screen?
Yes, one moment, please.
And just to say, it's so nice to see so many of you on the call, because I know you're all busy. So it's really nice and important to see that you actually take the time to listen in and learn from each other. So we have a real community.
Elizabeth should be able to know. Great.
So over to the Somalia team.
Could you confirm whether you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So thanks so much to our colleagues in the global GBV AoR for this opportunity to present on the scale up of drought response in Somalia. My name is Elizabeth Kigen. I'm currently in Somalia on surge deployment to support scale up for drought response coordination. So I sit in Mogadishu supporting the national GBV AoR. So a brief background on drought in Somalia. Approximately 7.8 million people, or half of the population, is affected by the worst drought in the last 4 decades. This follows 4 consecutive seasonal failures since a year ago. And this has surpassed the last drought of 2010 to 2011, as well as 2016 to 2017 in terms of both severity and duration of the drought. And the 5th seasonal failure is projected. Roughly 3.3 million people are displaced across the country, and majority of whom are women and children. There are over 2,000 formal as well as informal settlements with limited access to basic services. So this increases exposure to GBV of women and girls. In terms of the most affected regions, the most affected is the southwest state that is receiving most of the displaced persons, with inflows to Baidoa city. Banadir, that is in Mogadishu, is also affected. Kismayo in Jubaland state is also affected. So these are among the most affected regions. The drought has depleted the family and communal resources.
Elizabeth, for me, you dropped out. I don't know if others hear you.
No, we can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
In terms of the
You're falling out again.
The types of GBV, this is from the yes. Thanks for confirming. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. So in terms of the types of GBV, intimate partner violence is consistently the most reported non-core type of GBV in terms of case context, which is accounting for 60% of the reported incidents. And the GBV IMS data recorded increase by 10% of Q2 data compared to Q1 data. And this is correlated to negative coping mechanisms arising from stress in the household due to the drought. Physical assault among the 6 core types of GBV is also the most commonly reported type of GBV, and we noted increase, which is also correlated to the drought. Rape reported incidents of rape during the second quarter recorded 13% of the reported incidents, which is an increase by 7% compared to the data of Q1. There is also increase in the number of incidents reported by the host communities. Overall, majority of the reported incidents account for the displaced persons at 60%, but there is also a sharp increase in the number of incidents reported by the host communities, and this is correlated to the drought. The GBV IMS data also recorded 20% increase of women and girls accessing life-saving services, and this is also correlated to the drought. Women and girls are exposed to GBV while trekking for long distance in search of water and other basic services. They are also exposed to GBV due to limited shelter that does not offer adequate protection. Often they are just sticks with pieces of cloth. They are called bulls in Somalia. So anyone can have access, especially at night when there is poor lighting in the settlement. GBV service providers also note poor sanitation facilities is also another driver for GBV, given that in the majority of the informal settlements, the new settlements, they are not desegregated for male and female, and then they also don't have lockable drawers. They are not lit at night, so this increases exposure to GBV for women and girls. Women and girls are also exposed to GBV given the fact that in the Somali culture, men are the primary source of protection in the community, but they are left behind during the drought. So women and children migrate in search of assistance, leaving men behind, so they don't have that protection by the community because the men have been left behind. They are by themselves with the children. And in Somalia recently, about 2 weeks ago, we had the mission of the Emergency Relief Coordinator, and the mission highlighted the need to scale up operational capacities of the clusters in order to effectively respond and avert famine, especially at the sub-national level in the drought-affected areas. So the GBV AoR developed the strategy for drought response and famine prevention. So the strategy is available in this link. Key messages have also been developed highlighting the key issues, the funding required, the gaps, and the challenges. The GBV AoR scaled up coordination, GBV coordination through site deployment. So myself, Farid, and another one also will be coming over to support GBV coordination in the 3 zones. Coordination is also scaled up in the hubs in the drought affected areas with the local and international staff that have been deployed and are on the ground supporting coordination, supporting the partners that are scaling up interventions. Overall, the GBV AoR requires 16 million for response in operational priority 1 areas up to December. Around 700,000 people are targeted. This is for both the drought response and also the HRP. In terms of locations, 31 priority 1 locations have been affected. These are the locations that have been severely affected by the drought. The GBV AoR is also currently conducting the mapping exercise of the GBV facilities in the drought affected areas. So we ask the partners to share the coordinates of the facilities of the women and girls safe spaces, one-stop centers, the safe shelters, and then we are preparing the map, which we will use this to showcase where the services are, where there are gaps, where there are needs. So we will use this information for advocacy purposes and also to highlight the gaps and needs and scale up where there are huge gaps in GBV services. Over to you, Farid, for the next slide. Farid?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can you hear me clearly, please?
Yes, even though you're very soft. Sorry, let me mute from my end.
And if you could take me to the slide as well. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Can't hear Farid.
Right, okay. So colleague, as part of the scale of interventions, enhancing access to CMR services remains the priority. So thus far, 10 kits, kit 3 has been procured and positioned for distribution among CMR service providers that we have identified across Somalia. So it's not only specifically targeting one particular state, but the entire country. As of last week, 53 still remains to be arriving to the country, so they're in the pipeline. Some 21,505 MHM kits on the pipeline too. Roughly around 10,000 dignity kits have been procured for distribution in drought areas. Additionally, around 21,500 dignity kits there in the pipeline as well. In our today's meeting, the GBV subcluster at the national level, what we want at the AoR at the national level as well as subnational level, that partners, if there are needs identified for the dignity kits, they need to reach out to a UNFPA program colleagues as well as at the AoR. Specialized PSS integrated in the case management process or processes. There has been need for cash and voucher assistance, which has been identified as part of the case management. The needs on the ground is expressed as well as identified and assessed by service providers. There has been a great need for the cash and voucher assistance as a risk mitigation measure, but also so that it could improve positive coping mechanism. So that's that. The women and girls safe spaces to be established in the affected locations, primarily focusing on the drought affected regions. Next slide. Capacity developments remains one of the key priority. This remains central to not only improving the knowledge and skills, but also how the knowledge and skills and guidelines are translated at the field level as well. So the focus remains on building the capacity of the frontline service providers, talking about the GBV service providers on Gbb Response, but also non-GBV service providers and prioritized clusters. When it comes to GBV risk mitigation, GBV YAS guidelines, rollout, but also the community-based organizations on prevention, community sensitization as well. So thus far, pre-coordination training in each of the zones have been organized. 10 days CMR TOT, step down CMR training facilitated by the pool of the trainers are planned due to the need of the trainings that has been highlighted by the purpose of the AoR at the national level as well as at the subnational level. There has been a GBV referral training, including PSCA training for CCM cluster. But discussion have also begun with other clusters, such as wash cluster, health cluster, food security, as well as nutrition clusters on GBV mainstreaming and integration. So the idea is that it's going to be a stepwise training. In step one, what we are trying to do is part of the initial discussion among the GBV AoR colleagues at the national as well as at the subnational level, engage the clusters coordinators as well as general focal points. Step two, we work closely with these prioritized clusters and work on the essential action, but also the essential action identified as per the HPC, humanitarian program cycle, to begin with the assessment, analysis, resource mobilization, implementation, coordination, and monitoring and evaluation, as well as reporting at the minimum level as well. So we also hope to arrange a TOT, and once we have a resource pool of the TOTs, that will also help us in the rollout at the subnational level and just at different districts. Awareness raising on available services that we have, GBV risk mitigation, referrals, safe reporting of SEA. There has been a continuous effort to make the affected population aware on SEA reporting, but also the community-based organization on referral as well. There was a suggestion in today's AoR as well that we can have joint referral pathways with CP cluster and general protection cluster as well. But again, we need to see the pros and cons of that. The interagency assessments in drought affected areas, Bedova, it was conducted in April, and in other region at the subnation level, it is planned in the near future as well. What we're also trying to do, and again, it was discussed in today's AoR meeting, GBV AoR meeting, that if we could do a capacity needs assessment, because again, capacity building by the frontline GBV service providers, as well as other prioritized clusters remain a priority for us. So we need to conduct a capacity need assessment for the GBV AoR, but also capacity needs assessment with reference to what the clusters prioritize. I think someone is unmuted. If you could unmute, if you could mute that person, because it's been very distracting. So the capacity needs assessment of the frontline GBV service provider, as well as the prioritized clusters, so that could help us, in the best possible way, which is practical, organic, to build the capacity of those clusters partners on the most effective way in GBV mainstreaming and integration. So that's that, and we developed a work plan, capacity building plan based on the capacity needs assessment. So that's that. Next slide. Shiva, could you take us to the next slide, please?
Elizabeth, could you move the slide?
Right, so these are some of the challenges that have been identified. Elizabeth, okay, that's fine, good. So restricted access because of very fragile political context, as well as insecurity, and there are certain pockets where the miscreants and the terrorist groups have a strong presence. So it reduced the operational space. Movement restrictions are still there, which is why it's effectively a bit difficult to monitor the progress on the ground, as well as how best we can monitor the projects that clusters partners are implementing, but also do the safety audits. So the operational presence is somehow limited or being hampered by the fragile security context, as well as the ongoing conflicts. Funds remains a huge issue. The AoR is ambitious, the country program colleagues are very ambitious for this particular scale up for the GBV interventions. And the AoR is only 16% funded under the HRP. So one suggestion in today's meeting was that we should strive for the capacity assessments, the rapid assessment from our side, the GBIMS data that the report has been just released, as well as the fact sheet that we can use for engaging donors. And we can also present our presentations on the sensitivity of our mandate, but the criticality of it. And also because while 4 other clusters have been prioritized for this particular response, especially the drought, while protection is cross-cutting. So hence, it's important that we showcase showcase the GBV interventions is life-saving, but also that we need to respond to the urgent, immediate needs of the affected population, victims and survivors in particular. There has been limited existence of shelters and safe spaces, which has been expressed by partners, and the lack of those further risk of violence to the survivors. Again, there has been gaps in trained CMR service providers, which has been expressed by and then communicated to us by different partners. So that's that from our side. Thank you so very much, Elizabeth. Thank you, colleagues. Shiva, I over to you for questions. Any questions, comment?
I saw one question in the chat, maybe while others are thinking, around what are the items in the dignity kits?
Maybe Elizabeth, over to you.
If you're talking, you're on mute.
Yes, sorry, we were talking and yet we were muted. My colleague Nkiru will respond to that question. She's the GBV program manager for UNFPS Somalia.
Okay, there are some of the items we have in the dignity kit. It's been actually recently contextualized, especially within the since we started having this scale up in the humanitarian response due to the drought. So we have sanitary towels, you know, the disposable ones. We have toilet soap. We have the dira, the Somali dira dress. 3 pieces of the Somali dira dress. We have the female underwear, pants. That is about 6 pieces. We have the comb, the headscarf, the toothpaste. We have a toothbrush. We have hair oil. We also have body lotion. We have a laundry soap. We also have also put a white fabric bag in the kit, just in case the beneficiaries would like to use them. Sometimes also we put dates, so it's according to what the women and girls in the locations are requesting for. Over.
Thank you, Nkiru. I see a hand from April in New York in the autumn. So over to you, April, please.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth and Farid, for that. It's great to hear of all of these efforts to really scale up, because one of the things that we're trying to do all the time is to amplify some of your calls. So this is really appreciated. I just wanted to raise the issue that, you know, I hear in many other forums, and in particular this last week, because it was the UN General Assembly. And so we did have lots of side discussions around women, peace, security, gender-based violence, gender equality. And one of the concerns, you know, that came from some of these forums is that we are a little bit too slow to respond. So there is something, either it's a perception or that we are too slow to respond. So how can we address this, whether it's to mitigate that perception or to really address the fact that there are challenges to our scale up and adequate response?
That's an important question, the one that I can't answer on my own.
Okay.
Do you want to go, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, let me try. Let me start first, because I was here longer than Elizabeth. Elizabeth has just resumed with Farid. So I was acting a long time before the colleagues came.
Right, sure.
Yeah, so about the slow response to, about the perception of the slow response by the GBV actors, it's not entirely correct, because it depends actually on context. Because for the Somalia context, we have been actually intervening especially before the drought got so severe. We have been intervening and we have been raising concerns about the impact of GBV, the increasing prevalence of trends of GBV, especially with the help of the GBV AMS. So we have been sharing data, and we have been trying to put some, some significance and some attention to GBV, especially within the Somalia drought event. But essentially, when you go to the camps and when you do a rapid assessment and you are talking to a group of women and girls, and the first thing they will say is that they need food. That's the first thing. Then they need water. That's the second thing. And before they even remember issues that are, other issues. So that is why it's like it has guided the Somalia response to prioritize these clusters before prioritizing issues of gender-based violence. But what we have done is to try to prove to them that even though women lack water, even though they have indicated needs for water and food, when they are in the process of trying to procure water and food, something may happen. They may be subject to, they may suffer gender-based violence. When they trek long distances, they may be, harassed. They may be raped, and this is actually what is happening. And also, especially with the results, with the food insecurity that has been brought about by the drought. So it became more permissive that women and girls who are desperate could offer sex for such favors. So we have started in the beginning. We were asked to write an integration strategy, how and to prove that GBV is important and how it can be integrated within the 4 priority clusters that were identified. We did that. We were asked also to calculate our needs, to show that and to show that GBV is happening. We have used our GBV MS data to call attention to the fact that GBV is happening. And then we have a strong advocacy from the representative of the UNFPA, who has pushed to have the data that we share with OCHA, to have it, reflect on the reports that OCHA routinely shares. Even up to this morning, we were responding and working with OCHA and providing data so that GBV response can reflect on the dashboard that is showed that is shared with donors. So the argument is, even though they are prioritizing the four clusters, we are trying to show within the 4 clusters and beyond the 4 clusters that GBV is happening. That is what we are doing. Over. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then may I add on what Nkiru said. Slow response was lessons learned from, it came from the evaluation of the 2011 and also 2017 drought. One of the recommendations, one of the concerns from the national organizations was the slow response by the clusters, by the donors, by the UN agencies. So that was one of the lessons learned, of which in the current drought response, everybody is scaling up. There is a massive scale up of services by all the clusters because this is, in order to avert famine, because we are not yet at the level of famine, but it seems we are almost there. So that is what all the responses are, targeting prevention of famine. Thank you. Over to you, Astrid.
No, and maybe just to add, because I don't know the situation as well as Farid and Nkiru and Elizabeth, but at the outset, there was coordination, I think, in 10 areas, but mainly through the government. So it's been kind of led by the government before in the sub-regions, right? Before this activation again happened. I mean, not at the national level, but in some regions. And I understand that the whole access issues and security issues are immense. So I don't have the solution in mind, but I've seen from here that the scale up is supposed to be at the subnational level, and it's really at the in the most hard to reach field-based locations that we want the scale up to happen. And of course, I can imagine that there's a need for more partners as well. No, Elizabeth and Nkiru? I think I saw from
Yes,
Jennifer that there's also a need for more actors to come on board as IPs and to deliver services.
Yeah, so the scale up is targeting the 31 operational priority 1 areas, and these are the areas that are severely affected by the drought. So the scale up, not only in terms of services, but also in terms of coordination. The government is co-chairing the GBV coordination mechanisms at the national level and also in some of the sub-national levels, not all of them. In some of the sub-national levels, it's the NGOs, the local NGOs that are co-chairing in light of localization. The GBV AoR has been providing technical support and capacity development of the local organizations. And it happens that most of the drought affected areas are actually, the GBV AoR coordination mechanisms are co-chaired by the local organizations who have been on the ground for years. They have access, they have good relations with the government. So most of these locations are actually co-chaired by the, actually even chaired, they are chaired by the local organizations, and then UNFPA and the GBV AoR only provides technical support. However, recently, because of scale up for coordination, a number of international staff have also been deployed to these locations. So they are working closely with the local NGOs that are still coordinating. The international staff are only providing technical support, but the local NGOs are still leading the coordination mechanisms.
Great. And then I saw Anna had a question, unless she gave up on me being long-winded. And did you still want to ask the question, Anna?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I can turn on my video. This is Anna from Interaction. My question was, you mentioned the PSCA and how you're working with certain communities and organizations to ensure that they're aware of the PSCA referral pathways. I was curious how effective you see the PSCA network in Somalia, as this was an issue raised with the principals, and we didn't have a lot of insight as to how that SCA response was going in Somalia. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if there's anything we can be doing to support you in ensuring that coordination is going well, and that those mechanisms are in place and survivor-centered and everything. So thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation. It was really, really helpful, and it's amazing the work that you're doing there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I can respond because right now UNFPA is chairing the PSCA network with UNSCR. Our PSCA coordinator is recently working from home, and so we are supporting the implementation of the action plan and the SOPs that she helped us to develop. Okay, I can see myself. I look very, very lovely. All right. So you are right. There is a difficulty actually for reporting PSCA in Somalia. People do not feel comfortable to report PSCA in Somalia. So before our PSCA coordinator left, we had done some consultations together with the support of UNFPA and of course other agencies. We had done different types of consultations. We had consultations with women, and we had consultations with men, and then we had consultations together. The purpose of the consultations was to see what reporting channels would be the communities would be comfortable with to report issues of PSCA, because really we're not getting the kind of reporting that we like to get. And we know that PSCA is happening. So we had done that consultations, and very interesting findings came out on whether what mode they would prefer. People are shying away from reporting to individuals. They want a channel that is not identifiable, that they can report without being identified. Things like that. So we have this report, and then we are going to be using the outcome of the report to present to the SCT team, to the HC on what the outcome of the report, and how we think and what we found out the communities would like, and how men would like to report and how women would like to report. So this is where we are, but you are completely correct. It's difficult. We're not getting a lot of reporting on PSCN. Definitely. Over.
It's happening.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I would be happy to follow up offline and chat with you a little bit more about this, because I think that this is a global issue that we're struggling with. And, maybe we could support or work. I don't know. I don't think there's an easy solution, but yeah, thank you for that information. It's really helpful.
Thank you.
And we need to kind of move on soon, but this is the heart of our work, so I don't want to cut anyone off. Nkiru, because if I understand correctly, you've been actually doing the PSCA coordination as well, and then you're supposed to hand over, right? It's a mandate that is temporary in Somalia. Am I right?
Yes, actually, the network has been. We have had the chair, UNSCR and IOM. They've chaired for like two years. 2 years, and then they handed over to UNFPA. So we're supposed to be the chair for some time, and then we hand over to another UN agency. That is the way it is designed, yeah. But now UNFPA hosts the PSCA coordinator, but we share the payment, the remuneration with other agencies. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think with that, I mean, if you have a lot of questions, you can reach out directly to Elizabeth and Farid and Nkiru. You can also write them to us, and then we can channel them back, because I also don't want to overload our field colleagues. But I thought that was a very good discussion, so thank you, and Farid as well. And maybe just before we move on to the risk mitigation, because of course Somalia is the big crisis together with the other scale-ups, but I just wanted to say that we do have Ashley, who arrived in Islamabad yesterday for the flood response. She's going to be there 1 week, and then she's moving. Then hopefully Ajaz, who's also on the call, will be joining for the IM response. But now I will turn over to Luana, who works between the GBV AoR and UNFPA at the global level. She's seconded to us by Switzerland to talk about her learning from Iraq. Over to you, Luana. And Luana, because we have the presentation afterwards, be sweet and precise.
Of course, I will be super fast as I can.
Don't run, but
Thank you so much, Astrid. So my name is Luana. I'm very happy to be here today. So for those that have attended the webinar at the beginning of the month, so there will be some repetition. I'm sorry for that, or maybe it's a good repetition. So I will talk today very briefly about the work that we have been doing with cash actors on GBV mainstreaming. So before I move on the next slide, I just wanted to clarify, because my let's say colleagues, Paola and Tenzin will present just after me. So we do differentiate between the use of cash for GBV programming, which we call sectoral cash. So it's really cash as a modality or as a tool for GBV programming, and it's usually tailored to and adapted to the needs of the survivor. So when it's usually part of case management, and they will talk about that in a minute. But what I will present today to you briefly is really the GBV mainstreaming within the large cash response. So what we usually call multi-purpose cash. And of course, they look into vulnerability criteria, but it's not sector specific. So we can go on the next slide, and I will just take you briefly through the approach that we had. So we really tried to talk to non-GBV specialists, so to the cash actors. And we realized that there were a lot of tools and guidance out there, but we were missing the very practical field-oriented tools. So during the past 2 years, we worked hand in hand with cash actors and cash working groups, really trying to break down silos and to speak the same language. So we worked at country level, always based on the requests from the country. We did a joint risk analysis of CVA programming, joint work plan. We drafted some tools. So we were able to finalize a toolkit that I will share also very soon. And we try to build the evidence and document all this approach. So we can go on the next slide. I don't want to spend too much time on the approach because I want to talk about Iraq. Yeah, so that's the toolkit. We will be adding more tools in the upcoming weeks because the field has been asking for more tools. So that's great. As you can see here, they are all very short and handy. Of course, they vary in the format, but the idea is that they really mirror what cash actors use on a daily basis. So for instance, if you look at PDM, additional question for post-distribution monitoring, the tool 6, it's really much something they can copy paste in their own Kobo tool, for instance. So the toolkit has been finalized, it's online, everybody can download. A lot of things are in Word or PowerPoint or format that can be really well appropriated. And we shared that in a webinar, as I said earlier this month, with 300 people. So that was a really good, result. So now I will just do a quick dive into the Iraq context. So in June, I was able to go to Erbil to do a 2-day workshop with cash and GBV actors. So Iraq is interesting because, as you probably know, they are transitioning out of the humanitarian context. So the humanitarian cash assistance, I mean, there are discussions that it will be integrated within the social protection scheme of the government. So we took those 2 days to really discuss about potential risks, GBV risks that could emerge or that would continue, and what we could do about it in terms of mitigation measure. And we have worked on an action plan that is being finalized right now. So hopefully by the end of the week, you will receive this action plan that we have also translated into Kurdish and Arabic. So we can go on the next slide, and I will just take you through briefly the different risks that we have identified. So Farid is here and he knows much better than me, but Farid, feel free to jump in if I say something that you want to complement. So we have a lot of people that are missing documentation, and actually it affects a lot widows, ethnic minorities, female head of household from the so-called ISIS affiliated family, and GBV survivors are very much stigmatized. So there is a big issue of like registration to the social protection scheme of the government. The World Bank just did an interesting report. 30% of Iraq population are afraid to register to the social protection scheme of the government. And we see here a big risk for more vulnerable women. So definitely here, there will be a lot of work to be done in terms of like ID and making sure that the right people are on the list of the government. One thing that came really strongly from the participant in the workshop is that it will be government staff that will be the frontliners in distributing the cash. And of course, they are not seen as neutral. They will not be such a good gender balance. And in terms of diversity also, we may face some issues. So potentially leading to more discrimination and exclusion at delivery points. So this is really something so this is where our recommendation is really about training, making sure that we do some capacity building, we accompany them, etc. And we have some neutral checks during the distribution. CFM mechanism, it's also an issue because, as you know, Iraq is quite well known for the hotline that we have now, but with the decreasing of funding, we may have less money. And so some of the CFM mechanism might not be still, functioning or as good quality. So this is also something that is a big issue when it comes to GBV risk, of course. And then data was a really big one and really interesting also for the cash geeks in terms of fraud, corruption, abuse and exploitation. Of course, as I said before, GBV survivors are very much stigmatized. Female head of household with this ISIS, so-called ISIS affiliated also. So they are really worried. The participants in the workshop were really worried about women being affected disproportionately with this issue of data. They were saying how the government will store the data, what kind of protocols, and so on. So of course, here again, a lot of advocacy and lobbying that needs to be done with the government. And the last one, so this is really a snapshot. I think that the whole learning brief will be super interesting, hopefully. But the last one was more about social norms. So really, there is an issue of like controlling the cash assistance for women that they receive. A lot of participants also mentioned that boys are privileged over girls when they receive assistance. Negative coping mechanism. Of course, debt is a big one, but they also mentioned child marriage. So here again, we have identified a few mitigation measures that needs to be put in place. And of course, what is really important is that we need to engage the government early on. So making sure that accountability, ownership, the whole handover starts basically now. And also there is a big work that is currently being done with durable solution actors. And I think NGOs and INGOs really need to be part of the discussion. So this is just a teaser for the learning brief coming up. And I just have one last slide about what is next. I think it's interesting for you today to hear about the GBV AoR work on risk mitigation in cash. So the idea is really to build on the approach that we have used so far. So we have realized that we need to adopt our language when we talk to cash actors. We need to be as close as possible to field realities. And of course, the more privileged GBV and cash working group relationship we can have, then the best results we have. And of course, we as GBV experts need to be available for support. So I think we also have an important role to play. Also in demystifying the risk analysis and the GBV risk mitigation, that we are not asking them to do the work of GBV actors, but there are a lot of things that they can do, and it's not so complicated. And of course, we need to be proactive, and I think GBV coordinators are doing a great job. I'm receiving so many requests since this webinar from GBV coordinators and cash working groups that they want to work together. So this is really amazing, and this is also in line with donors' requirement that we often say. So it really needs to be a must-have and not a nice-to-have this GBV risk mitigation part of any cash programming. So as I said, we will continue to roll out the toolkit, build more the capacity of GBV coordinators, including the regional teams, and the plan for next year is also to build more evidence. So we are in contact now we are looking into identifying a university to do an operational study. And the plan is to develop a set of indicators to measure perceived feeling of safety of women when they access cash. And we are also, of course, coordinating with Erin Patrick from the GBV guidelines team, with Christine Heckman from UNICEF, who is doing a lot of work on GBV risk mitigation. So there will be a lot more to come. And as I said, Iraq is coming up, but also Moldova. I'm going to Colombia and Yemen this year also to do this work. And DRC, Burkina Faso, Myanmar are also going to do some joint work with cash actors. So hopefully some learning from this context as well. I have no idea how long I took, but I hope it's not too much. Thank you.
Great, Luana. It's super interesting, but I wonder, just in terms of giving a fair amount of time to everyone, I'd suggest we move on to the last presentation, and then we take all questions afterwards, except if someone has such a burning question, they can't wait. Looking in the chat.
I will have to leave at 4, unfortunately, in half an hour, but I can reply to the questions in the chat, no problem. Or you can reach out to me. I will put my email address. Thanks, Astrid.
Great. And then let's try to finish at 4 at the same time. I mean, this is a very exciting presentation coming up. And this time it's about Ecuador, Colombia, and Northwest Syria. So it's integration of cash assistance in GBV case management study in those 3 countries, Ecuador, Colombia, Northwest Syria. And we're very happy to have Tenzin Manell, who's the Associate Director for Cash and Livelihoods for WRC, and Karen Pinzon of CARE, who's the Senior Technical Advisor on Cash and Vouchers, and Paola Castiati. I'm sorry, Paola, I don't have your title, but I know you're from CARE as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm the Senior Technical Advisor.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sure Karen will be happy to get a promotion.
Well, here it's declared. Yeah, sorry about that. So
it's just going to be Paola and I today.
Great. So good luck, or over to you, Tenzin and Paola.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I just want to check you can hear me. All right.
We hear you well.
Excellent. Okay. So thanks so much for carving out time for us to share today our learning from these three contexts. As you can see on this slide, we've had many partners in this endeavor, and with support from, excuse me, 2 donors, including USAID's BHA and also LRA, we've implemented cash assistance integrated GBV programming in these 3 contexts and also carried out evaluations. And we're going to talk to you about the main findings and recommendations across sites. So in each of these sites, the kind of division of labor or role was that WRC was providing training and technical assistance, led the evaluation. CARE delivered cash assistance and technical assistance as well. And local partners in each site with expertise in GBV service provision, GBV case management specifically, delivered those GBV services that were comprehensive, that integrated cash referrals. And each program model was studied, was based on the Cash and GBV Compendium guidance and also the WRC, IRC, Mercy Corps Cash and GBV Toolkit. If you could advance to the next slide, please, and thank you. So in all 3 sites, the evaluation designs were quasi-experimental and mixed methods. We ended up switching this up a little bit in Northwest Syria, and I'll speak about that momentarily. In Ecuador, WRC CARE Ecuador, the Ecuadorian Center for the Promotion of Action of Women, or CEPAM, and the National Union of Domestic Workers and Related Workers, or UNTA, and Mujer y Mujer Foundation partnered to deliver cash integrated GBV case management for migrants, refugees, and host nationals. For this project and evaluation, we were looking specifically at IPV, whereas in the other sites, we looked at GBV more broadly. So in Ecuador, our project and evaluation were focused on Guayaquil, which is the 2nd largest city in Ecuador, which hosts the majority of Venezuelan migrants and refugees in the country. And this city also reports one of the highest levels of GBV since the COVID-19 pandemic began, with the emergency line averaging 67 alerts each day for women reporting IPV. So very alarming rates of IPV. And in this study, we had a total of 113 participants who self-disclosed as IPV survivors, sought GBV case management services. We did the study over 3 months. So we had a non-cash group, those receiving GBV case management only, and a cash group, which included those services plus a cash component. In Colombia, WRC and CARE Colombia partnered with the Corporation of Professionals for Comprehensive Community Development, or COPRODINCO, and the work was in Ocaña. We also received support from the South African Medical Research Council on the research component. And in this location, as sadly everywhere, there's really high prevalence of GBV against women and girls, and also individuals with a diverse SOGIESC. And so we were able to be a little bit more inclusive in this context, supporting both cis women and trans women. And in this context, in Colombia and Ocaña, Venezuelan migrants and refugees face discrimination, lack of legal status, work in the informal sector, and all these components, all these factors that they experience compound their exposure to GBV risk and incidents of violence. And in some cases, this includes hostilities from host community members. So in Colombia, we were able to have a study sample of 100 participants in the cash group and 100 participants in the non-cash group. And for the third and final context that we were studying in Northwest Syria, WRC, Care Turkey's cross-border team, and Syria Relief and Development partnered for the implementation in Jarablus and Salkin, again with support from South African Medical Research Council on the research component. And due to some challenges during implementation, we weren't able to evaluate the program as intended with our quasi-experimental design, but we were able to adapt and examine changes in a smaller cohort of 33 participants in GBV case management. And in this context, I just want to flag that in addition to the integration of cash into GBV case management, there was also delivery of in-kind assistance. And for that study, we looked at 3 and 9 months from the start of the evaluation. So no surprise to anyone on this call, the ongoing conflict in Syria means that there's gaps in services, gaps in quality as well as availability that women and girls are continuing to face, high stigma, persistent GBV in many forms. Next slide, please, and thank you. So I want to talk through the process and also program model. And this was quite similar across 3 contexts with some nuances. So the first is the GBV programming piece. As shared, national partners who were GBV service providers perform the intake and case management according to best practice of GBV case management, the interagency guidelines, etc. But this included an assessment of cash eligibility, both looking at the need for cash and if they respected the eligibility in our specific program. We, in Ecuador, had 2 partners providing GBV case management. So the first, CEPAM, was supporting CIS survivors of IPV, whereas Mujer y Mujer was providing GBV case management to survivors of IPV from the LGBTQI+ community, including trans survivors. The next component of our program model was the cash and or in-kind assistance. So in-kind assistance, again, was used only in Syria in combination with cash or as an alternate to cash where survivors were did not prefer to receive cash assistance. And in this case, following the safety plan, our partners assessed, having assessed that cash was appropriate for certain cases, then activated referrals to CARE, who then facilitated that cash delivery. And the cash component, both in terms of the delivery mechanism and the transfer value, were slightly different in each case. So I just want to share that. In Ecuador, survivors received one-off cash transfers equivalent to $100 US, and this was delivered via ATM. And survivors received a unique PIN number, either by phone or by voucher from their GBV caseworker. In Colombia, survivors received between $91 and $274 US, depending on the needs of their case, via the delivery mechanism Effecti. While in Syria, survivors received up to a maximum of $500, depending on the needs of their case. There was no predefined transfer amount, and the majority of survivors received $150, and cash assistance was delivered as cash in hand. For the in-kind support that was delivered for a multimodal approach in Syria, for survivors for whom it was appropriate or preferred in-kind assistance as an alternative to cash, in-kind assistance was to access temporary shelter, transportation, clothing, these kinds of things. Then on to the referrals. So looking at complementary services, including health, psychosocial support, livelihoods, legal, mental health services as well. And then the monitoring and evaluation as GBV case managers carried forward regular case follow-up with survivors according to GBV case management best practice and those steps. WRC led the evaluation, and the outcomes of interest that we were looking at were violence, economic capacity, well-being, and also access to services. So if you could kindly go to the next slide, I will pass to Paola for a minute. Thanks.
Thank you. So in terms of findings, we got some quite exciting news about the research we ran. And clearly we realized that cash integrated GBV case management reduced incidental violence and associated risks. Access to cash. Yes.
Sorry to interfere. Was it on purpose that you closed the presentation? At least on my presentation is now.
I'm not handling the presentation.
I'm doing it, but I'm preparing for the video to be screened. I think that's
okay. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I was just about to say that in general, we realized how much cash assistance amplified survivors' improvement in terms of mental health, self-reliance, and also had a good impact on familiar relationship. But instead of hearing all of this from my side, we thought it was nice for you guys to hear it directly from my colleagues who implemented the activities on the ground, and that's why we are playing the video now. I guess you need to share the audio, otherwise I'm not sure you can hear.
To further study and demonstrate cash and voucher assistance's effectiveness in the context of gender-based violence. 4 categories of outcomes were examined in the quantitative analysis: intimate partner violence and protection, economic agency, well-being, and assets. We found that cash assistance must adhere to a survivor-centered and context-informed approach to enhance survivors' protection and reduce exposure to harm. In northwest Syria, violence against women and girls, long rooted in gender norms, has been exacerbated by conflict, COVID-19, drought, and other factors. CARE Turkey and its partner SRD used the Cash and GBV Compendium and the WRC Cash and GBV Toolkit to design a 9-month program carried out in northern Aleppo and Idlib and evaluated their outcomes after 3 and 9 months.
In northwest Syria, the most essential services are scarce or not available. This makes provision of cash voucher assistance to survivors particularly important, because with this support, they are able to receive timely and life-saving services that they need.
When the 3-month program ended, the evaluation findings indicated that women who received cash or cash and in-kind assistance reported less gender-based violence and associated risks, as well as improved economic capacity, personal well-being, and the well-being of children, interpersonal relationships with family members, and interactions with community. And these trends continued on even 6 months later.
I remember an intimate partner violence case. She used the cash assistance for an emergency shelter, and she used some of this amount as seed capital to generate income. With this support, not only was she able to flee and recover from an abusive relationship, but we were able to mitigate the risk of early marriage against her daughter.
The study informed recommendations for future programs, increasing the amount and duration of cash transfers, expanding the scope of complementary services to include livelihood support and access to sexual and reproductive health care, diversifying the ways that cash assistance is delivered, and expanding outreach to adolescent girls who face barriers when trying to access service points, and supporting proactive coordination between GBV service providers and other humanitarian aid actors.
There is not one way of integrating cash voucher assistance and gender-based violence. We in CARE Turkey designed our interventions based on what makes the most sense for us and for our context. Whichever the model is, the intervention should be safe, inclusive, participatory, and it should aim for empowerment of women and girls.
This localized, survivor-centered approach was a key aspect of designing the second intervention and study in Colombia. Incidences of GBV are high among Colombia's internally displaced and refugee populations, the second largest in the world, especially in the Norte de Santander region. WRC, CARE Colombia, and Corpro Dinko worked together to implement CVA in their GBV response in El Caño.
78 mujeres de las 200 que fueron atendidas habían sido abusadas sexualmente y 25 mujeres habían sufrido acosos o acoso sexual. El proceso de recolección de pruebas es muy importante porque es realmente lo que te permite dar cuenta de cómo se sintió el sujeto durante todo el proceso de implementación. No es fácil que una mujer hable de su vida, de su pasado, de todos sus dolores, pero nosotras fuimos hasta el mercado local, haciendo como especies de campañas educativas sobre lo que es la violencia de género. Y muchas mujeres después nos llamaron y nos dijeron, sí, yo he sufrido violencia de género, yo no quiero sufrir más esto. Son mujeres en realidad muy valiosas, muy inteligentes, pero que han tenido pocas oportunidades para desarrollar lo que ellas realmente pueden dar.
The initial findings from the report indicate that overall, the cash group, in comparison to the non-cash group, saw statistically significant reductions in intimate partner violence across more protection outcomes over time, significant beneficial changes in economic capacity outcomes, and improved well-being and hope scores.
Yo llamé a una participante por teléfono y le pregunté para qué le había servido esa transferencia. Dijo, yo sé que 370,000 son pocos, pero busqué por toda Ocaña hasta que encontré un lugar donde vendían ladrillos de tercera. Y encerré toda mi casa con estos ladrillos de tercera y además compré una puerta. De esta manera mis hijos y yo tenemos ahora más seguridad.
Las mujeres se ayudaron unas entre otras para la conformación de emprendimientos. Formaron redes entre ellas para la superación de la violencia.
Not all outcomes in these studies significantly improved. Barriers include duration and scope of services and distribution amounts. However, knowing these barriers allows for improvement of GBV programs integrating CVA.
This research and the report showed us that it's very important for all sectors to integrate GBV risk mitigation strategies into their programming.
Esperamos que este proyecto replique la información que dejamos en las mujeres y que además de esto, pues que las entidades que trabajaron con nosotros sigan implementando los procesos de atención humanizada para las mujeres sobrevivientes de violencias basadas en género. Que ojalá hubiese una segunda parte de este proyecto, porque trabajamos con 200 mujeres que tienen sueños y quieren materializar esos sueños.
The Northwest Syria and Colombia studies contribute to the mounting evidence that the integrated use of cash and voucher assistance in gender-based violence programming, when appropriately designed, is safe, effective, and essential to support GBV survivors in their recovery from violence. To learn more about cash and voucher assistance and gender-based violence response, visit womensrefugeecommission.org.
Thank you for sharing the video. I hope you guys enjoy it. I watched it many times and I still quite like it anytime. Those are the main findings from Colombia and northwest Syria. And now I can guide you through quickly through the findings we got from Ecuador. If you can enlarge the screen, I think it's going to be more visible, but meanwhile, the findings from Ecuador are exciting and positive as much as the one from Colombia and northwest Syria. In particular, as we were saying, in Ecuador, we focused on IPV, and we found that majority of people felt more safe, more secure after having received cash. They haven't experienced violence anymore, and majority of them also felt less control from their abusive partner. In particular, there's a direct link between the cash disbursements and the reduction in violence, because cash recipients were able to flee their abusive relationship, and they were also not forced to go back to their abusive partner in case of financial struggle. In terms of working with the LGBTQIA+ community, there's still a big component of stigma for them to disclose, and that has been a big barrier that we found along the implementation. Despite the fact that people became more aware about their rights, they were more aware about the meaning of violence and what they were going through. That also helped them improve their feeling of independence, self-confidence, resilience, and also their familiar relationship benefit out of it. Particularly, the case management has been big and strong component of the whole project, and also increase the possibility to access services, as the legal services, the social networks were improved, as we heard also from the experiences in Colombia. The possibility given to people to gather together was really important and supportive for them. So if we can move to the next slide. We also clearly see an impact on the economic situation, and many of the participants were investing in micro enterprise, and they had the chance to have a more sustainable income. In terms of the delivery mechanism that has been used, people thought that withdrawing cash directly from the ATM and just using the PIN was really safe, and nobody reported having had any issue with their abusive partners if they were still living together. And everyone felt very comfortable and safe going to the ATM. In general, people felt that they had a greater control on their financial resources, and they felt like they were their own driver of change for their own from their own life. And I might take one more minute just to share with you one quote that we have as front page of the Ecuador report, which goes like, "I feel like a queen now. I swear to you, I was minimized when I was with my children's father. I was beaten, I was abused, I was yelled at, mistreated. But now, as I tell to my children, with money, I'm the queen. Because with money, I can pay your expenses." And with this, I'll give it back to Tenzin for the first round of recommendation. You can move to the next slide.
Thanks, Paola. So we're going to share top-line recommendations, which were common across all three contexts, but we can share the report links so you can dive into each individually. So overall, we would recommend that the integration of cash into GBV case management become systematic, and we see this through UNFPA's leadership and others, that this is becoming more commonplace to have the integration of cash be an option, not always appropriate, but important to systematically assess and activate those referrals where they are appropriate. In addition, the importance of legal and psychosocial support as part of the program model were very clear. It's important that the standard operating procedures be strengthened, both for the integration of cash into GBV case management, as well as the linkages between GBV programming, cash to meet basic needs, livelihoods programming, and SRH programming, and that there be capacity building across aisles, so to speak, so that we all understand each other's methodologies more, can ensure quality integrated programming so that there's not gaps in services for GBV survivors. We saw in multiple contexts that without sufficient support, GBV survivors were often in the position to triage their urgent needs. In some cases, even though the cash assistance was intended with a specific protection objective, survivors chose to prioritize needs of their children or other dependents to meet their basic needs, overspending the cash on their protection related goods and services that were needed. We also saw that when there was a gap in livelihoods programming, in particular in Northwest Syria, that many survivors in Northwest Syria and in the other sites as well chose to invest part of their cash transfer, again, not to afford those protection related goods and services specifically, but to invest in a micro enterprise and an income generation activity And so it's really important to consider, if there is a dearth of these programs, how can there be a comprehensive program model? In some cases where there's organizational capacity, it might be key to bring in SRH services, livelihood services closer to that core GBV programming. Finally, just to share that, this mutual capacity building, Luana is doing the part around GBV risk mitigation into CVA across, sectoral outcomes. There's available resources in multiple formats, and so we want to promote those as well. There's clearly an important gap they can address. In addition, we saw that the transfer value was insufficient in some cases, while in Northwest Syria, there wasn't a predetermined transfer value and is a little bit more flexible. In Ecuador, for example, it was fixed. And despite that, across contexts, we found that the cost of transportation and childcare, which would enable GBV survivors to fully participate in the GBV case management activities or those group activities for GBV survivors, often was too expensive, or they weren't able to have the free time from providing care. So important to consider that both in the transfer value and in terms of the services that are provided. Also, to increase the duration and frequency of psychosocial support. We heard from survivors and from program staff that even though there was many sessions, that there could be many more sessions, and that was really, really key for survivors. In addition, Paola touched on survivor-led activities and also social networks being a real key to survivors' recovery. And we would recommend that group cash transfers, in addition to individual level transfers, be considered in future program models. And then, of course, the engagement of men and boys in GBV prevention is always key. And we saw room for improvement there as well. Next slide, please. And back over to you, Paola.
So, as we're saying, the social component, of course, is key for survivor of violence to heal from their experiences, and it will be recommended to build on and keep expanding safe spaces or create them where they're not existing in order to improve the spaces, also the physical spaces where people can feel more at ease and share their experiences, gather together and support each other. In particular, a specific focus can be given to the adolescents who needs to know which are the services which are available and how they can use them in order to prevent uncomfortable situation. And even more for adolescents, peer-to-peer type of support is key, as much as it's very relevant for the LGBTQI+ community in order for them to support each other and to go together through some of the most difficult debates about the self-awareness. And in terms of accessing services and how to make them available, if we move to the next slide, I'd like to show you the example of something done from the colleague in Ecuador. This is the service map. So basically what the team did, got in touch with Google Map and pinpoint the existing services divided into categories. On the screen, you can see a little QR code. So this leaflet has been printed out and distributed in many places in Guayaquil, and also together with the QR code, people were able to scan it and having the live map on their phone. So as any of us, when we use Google Map, if people needed through this service, they were able to immediately find the direction for them to reach the places that they need. That could have been a lawyer, pharmacy, an hospital, or anything that they needed in that moment. And I think that this is really useful, and I thought to share it with you to, maybe want to do something similar and make people's life easier when they need it. And that's it from my side. I don't know if maybe we have 2 minutes left. I don't know if you want to have some space for question. We are happy to take it, or over to you, Astrid.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. I think we should take some time for questions. I understand some people will have to leave, but I think it's a shame as well. If you're available for 5-10 more minutes, I think we should continue and have the questions, if that's okay for you both.
I'm gonna have to jump off in a little bit, but I can try to answer as many as possible, and then leave you with Paola if she's available.
Great, thank you both. So, Kate, did you have a question, or was it? Did you get your answer in the chat? I always like to call out the questions in the chat while I see if there's other comments or questions. I'm impressed you were able to to operate in the 3 contexts at the same time and pull all that learning from the 3 contexts that are quite different in such a short time.
Big undertaking. Just to read out Kate's question, she was asking what the time period we're following the transfer that we were documenting. So for Syria, it was both 3 and 9 months after the cash transfer was delivered, and then in Colombia and Ecuador, 3 months. And I had also, mentioned that longer duration studies are certainly important. We think this is a good start to developing, further evidence in this area, but we want to do longer term studies, including with, more rigorous, RCTs, etc. Over.
Thanks. Any questions? Kate, do you want to just say it? Because I don't have any other questions, and I see you writing in the chat. I'm calling you out.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Tenzin, you answered it, and obviously it's monitoring within the scope of that project and the project duration. But it did just make me think about for example, the psychosocial outcome monitoring toolkit that was developed, I think, by IRC, that's also integrated into the GBV IMS Plus when we look at monitoring psychosocial outcomes through GBV case management. And the guidance around that looks at, don't want to misspeak, I think it's monitoring that starts around the 3rd or 4th session and is then designed ideally to be something that's implemented, periodically with survivors to be able to really look at things like, functioning and perceptions of safety. So anyway, yeah, maybe just something to think about in terms of alignment in longer projects. But obviously, Tenzin, you already said in the chat that the longer duration studies will be important as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate. Just to jump in with another point I put in the chat is that post-distribution monitoring was carried out by GBV caseworkers with support from CASH colleagues, but administered by GBV caseworkers with individual GBV survivors 2 weeks after each transfer. So in some cases that was a one-off transfer. In some cases, survivors received multiple transfers, and PDMs were conducted, as well as the overall evaluation study. Paola, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
No, I think you covered has best practice. We always do the PDMs after each round of distribution, and those are the findings that you just shared.
Great.
If no other question, maybe I can take 1 second to speak about a couple of initiatives that we have upcoming. Happy to get other question if you do have them.
Go on.
So we are running a series of webinars. You might have seen them on the CALP network, and we are also running a series of workshops, always to leverage the integration of CASH and GBV activities. And we are now planning a 3rd virtual workshop, which focuses on the MENA region, which will happen on the 13th of October, and you're most welcome to join, and hopefully it's going to be an interesting session. And we are also thank you for sharing the link, and we are also updating a mapping of existing tools that are available for Cash and GBV, and it would be a great pleasure if you guys can update the document so we can see what we had ongoing so far and what we have considering the activities that you are running. That's it from my side.
Great, thanks. And the link is in the chat, everyone. So copy the link before we close the meeting. We can also share it, but I mean, it's good if you're interested that you already enter the link. Don't lose your time. And yeah, thank you for that. It's important work, and it is important that we get more of the evidence base and that we become more active on cash. So thank you so much. Everyone is very quiet. That's it's not because we're not happy, it's just how we function. So yeah, I think is there any final kind of communication? Otherwise, I think we can close the meeting because I know everyone is moving on to busy schedules. No? Then thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Tenzin. Thank you, Paola.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks to the Somalia team as well, and Luana. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.